Hi everyone, I'm James Humberstone. I'm a lecturer here in music education, and this is my 20-minute talk.
What do children need from education now and in the future? How is technology best used in the curriculum? How can innovative approaches to education be reconciled with established traditional ones? And what does student-centred learning really mean? I'm James Humberstone, a passionate composer and music technologist, and I'm proud to be a lecturer at the world-renowned Sydney Conservatorium of Music, part of the University of Sydney and nestled within our beautiful harbour. This 5-module course is not just for classroom or ensemble music educators. It's suitable for anyone interested in creativity-infused education, in contemporary education issues, and in the integration and use of digital technologies. It's designed to challenge old paradigms, to inspire innovative and creative pedagogical philosophies, and to develop your ability to critically respond to the latest research. We'll visit schools with vastly different approaches to learning and teaching, and meet inspiring teachers and principals.
So the rest of the trailer goes for another minute and a half, but I know you're all sold. You're currently itching to jump onto Coursera.org and sign up for this fantastic MOOC. MOOC means Massively Open Online Course, the open bit meaning that it's free, massively meaning that the infrastructure, it being on the internet, means that we can support any number of students, and online course, I think, speaks for itself. The product of 9 months of work, filming, scripting, editing, and I can promise you most of that work done by other people. My part in it has really just been to set everything in motion and stand and speak at the camera a lot and interview some amazing people. I feel completely justified now in talking for only 7 minutes of this 20-minute presentation, because I want to show you some of my films. I want to show you a lot of my films and introduce the subject matter to you. So when we go live, and our landing page is due to go live in the next 48 hours, so you'll be able to see the whole of that trailer and lots more, and sign up for your interest, then we'll be up and ready to run. When the course runs, it's going to run in 2 different modes concurrently. So it's on demand. For those who really like, if you were thinking of doing maybe the box set of The Walking Dead Season 6 this weekend, you could instead do a MOOC and learn lots more about technology in music education. Or you can do it what's called in session. And we haven't decided exactly when we'll run the first in session, but probably sometime after Easter. And in session means that you're doing it week by week at the same time as everyone else, so you can all help each other online. Now, I could do the boring thing and take you through what's in each week, week by week, but, I want to make this a little bit more fun. So I thought that I would engage in the key provocations, 3 key provocations about this course. And so the point of it being provocations is it's not about saying this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing. I think anyone who's been out there either practicing or researching or both as an educator knows that quite often there is no wrong and right. There's this good thing and that good thing and another good thing over here and some strange stuff over there. And so what we wanted to do was to look at the extremes in the 21st century of best practice and really cutting-edge research, and consider how we as music educators can form our own path through this. So the first provocation theme is, should we use technology at all? And funnily enough, yes, we were able to find schools who are using it for everything and schools who don't really touch it very much at all. I started off at the Northern Beaches Christian School in Terry Hills, which has what we call a BYOD program. 2 of their teachers, the 2 music teachers, are sitting right here in the audience, so you can ask them questions later on too. But their entire program is written to be delivered online to any device that students happen to be carrying. And their pedagogy, their design for the pedagogy, began with the design of spaces. So it's not just a question of, okay, we would like to use this computer program, we'd like to use that kind of laptop, this kind of technology, but they actually designed the different spaces in the different classrooms or the class areas to allow that pedagogy to work best for the space. And then from the sublime to the not at all ridiculous. A a Steiner school, also very local to that school, so just down the road from the Northern Beaches Christian, and it happens to be, I admit, later in the course, the hippie school that my children go to. And in fact, you can see one of them there. And so we look at this school where actually we don't really see very much technology at all, but lots of fantastic arts integration. We also look at how music is taught in that school. Sans technology, very kind of traditional Steiner. And then we headed out to Maryland's, an amazing school with an incredible inspirational principal called Natalie C. You can see her on the screen now. Hilltop Road Primary School in Maryland's, one of the first public schools to run a OLPC, one laptop per child, EXO program. So these are these little green, plasticky looking laptops that were developed initially for third world nations. Oh, there they happen to be on screen as I speak about it. And so they were really trying to reform a school that was having problems with things like behavior and attendance through engagement and using technology and changing the way that they taught. So I talked to a lot of these people and got their thoughts. I'll play you a bit of one of the first videos back at Northern Beaches Christian with Director of Innovation Steve Collis.
Technology can actually put people and relationships back in the centre by relieving the burden of always the teacher having to manage, always the teacher having to orchestrate. In fact, technology allows the teacher to become more receptive and to come alongside the students and really meet them. We think of technology as being part of the space. So in fact, you design physical space along the principles I've spoken about, then technological space, and actually finally you shape cultural space as well.
I love the fact that you're using the word technology and cultural in the same sentence. It reminds me of the fact that quite often people point out that there's a big gap between the culture of a school and the cultures that children live in outside school.
Kids are growing up in a world now that is media rich and that is incredibly entertaining. And so, and dynamic. And so when they come to school, the idea of the teacher just being able to do what they've always done and really capture the students' hearts, that just can't work anymore.
While I was at Hilltop, I also met with learning futurist David Price, who published the book Open last year, and talked to him about his theory that learning has actually already gone open. Anyone can learn anything, anywhere, anytime, any way that they like.
It's happening in the social space, and it's become so ubiquitous, I think, that we almost don't even notice it. When I give talks now, I do a quick head count on the numbers of people who have shared some piece of information. It might be a recipe, it might be something on Facebook, but they've shared a piece of knowledge or learned a piece of knowledge from someone else through social media, and it's nearly always 100%. And I just say to people, how many hands would have gone up even 10 years ago? And I think it's because it's become so universal so quickly that we've almost not seen it for the true revolution that it is. But it is happening predominantly in the social space, and that's presenting all kinds of challenges for those people who are working in formal learning, because we are now learning faster, it seems to me, in ways which engage us more deeply, because when we learn what we learn, when we choose to learn it in the way that we want to learn it, it's clearly highly compelling, or else we just wouldn't do it. So the challenge that formal educators have got, it seems to me, is how do you compete with this? How do you actually complement the learning which is taking place? A first step might be, how do you recognise that this learning is happening? Because it's happening at all ages, across all sectors of society.
Some of you will recognise David's name because before he was involved in learning futurism in all different areas of the curriculum around the world, he was one of the people who contributed to the Musical Futures Manifesto. And Musical Futures Manifesto was the British informal learning movement, which sort of swept through that country and has been terrifically successful there. It's had a few successes over here as well. I headed down to Melbourne because that's where some of the most active musical future schools. And for those who've never heard of this, the idea was grounded in the research of Lucy Green, who actually, rather than looking at music in schools, went and saw how people learned in popular music outside when they were just learning themselves through their own interest, through their own motivation. And following quite a few detailed studies, took that and sort of reverse engineered it as a pedagogy. So I interviewed Steve Sikowski, who is a teacher at a couple of schools, one primary and one high school down in Melbourne, using that pedagogy solely to teach music.
Part of the struggle with the older kids, it's not behavior, it's apathy, it's being lazy. Trying to get something that they can hook onto, that's the challenge of being the teacher. It's not telling them what to do, it's finding what they want to do. Usually in class we've got some iPads with maybe some tablature and things like that, but as soon as they go home they look up the stuff online, they look at YouTube, they look at tutorials on how to play certain songs, and then it comes into transposition, and that's always a great way because they're like, oh, I learned this song back home, here it is, how come it doesn't sound right? They're like, oh, well, it's actually been transposed to make it easier to play. And it just opens up a whole new avenue. And then, instead of forcing music theory down their throats, all of a sudden they want to know why it's not sounding proper. And then you can talk about transposition and 1-4-5s and all that stuff. Some of our kids upload their songs to their own YouTube channels. I've got grade 3s that film stuff and then put it online. Like that's fascinating. I have trouble still doing that. But with the older kids, especially at Doveton, Peter, Wardrobe, and Malcolm have made it a point that once they've done a composition unit, then they throw it up on the Doveton Live YouTube channel. If you haven't seen the channel, it's amazing, especially what Gene does as well with the filming. And so a lot of the Year 9 composition songs are on there. And it's just great to see them. You can tell, you know, they view it because the views keep going up and up and up.
And it wasn't just in these schools in comfortable Australia that we found technology really intrinsically involved in the teaching and learning of music. I'd love to say that we headed out to Kabul, but actually we met Ahmed Sarmas, the director of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, while we were in Melbourne as well. And he talked about how they were using technology there. I want to move on to the technology, obviously, which is the focus of our course. And as I understand it, technology has impacted what you can do at the school in a couple of different ways.
In 2012, given that need of the school and also the importance of technology, how technology is bringing closer the international community and practically converted world into a small globe, a small village. So we also procured facilities that enables us to bring a music teacher from any part of the world into a class. So we've got a distance learning center in our school with one of up-to-date video conferencing system, which enables us to collaborate with many music educators from around the world who investing in the professional development of our students and assisting us in those areas where we do not have expertise within the country, or we are not able to bring someone else as an expert faculty to assist us. So we have got the distance learning facilities and room, and up to now it's not just for the educational purposes we use it, but also from time to time just to connect our youths to their peers around the world. We have good contact with a number of music institutions around the world with whom we are linking our students. Sometimes they're asking questions about each other's culture, background, countries, and then they play live for each other. While at the same time we are using this technology for bringing teachers. We have been this year, from the very beginning of this academic year, we've been working with the Royal Academy of Music from Aarhus, Denmark. And this program will continue until the end of this academic year.
As I mentioned before, one of the really important things to me in the course is that we balance both practice and research, and you can see we've got fantastic examples of technology ingrained, technology enhanced music education going on all over the world. The research tells a similar story in terms of for the use of technology, although sometimes the research itself is a little bit flimsy. One of the things that we might conclude from the research is perhaps that if we can be sure of anything, it's that motivation does go up. But I always ask my students whether they think they would be more motivated if I gave them a $1,000 shiny device. It's harder, in the same way that it's easier to find pro-technology research, it's harder to find research that suggests that integrating technology in education is a very bad idea. But it's actually fairly well concluded, and I sum up the research on this, around preschool age children, where time in front of screen devices in most countries is recommended to be kept to absolutely 0 and to not more than a couple of hours for children under 7. And as I said, we did manage to find a couple of practitioners here and researchers who could back up some of our thinking about this, about why we might not want to jump into technology with both feet or without thinking carefully first. So the first one is Virginia Moller, who is the principal at Cameroy, the Steiner School. One thing I didn't see, well, I think I saw blackboards for the first time in a few years.
Yes.
And one thing I didn't see, the last school we were at, we had video screens on walls and lots of technology-infused learning. Is that a Steiner thing too?
Yes, it is. And it's due to our developmental approach and our view of child development. So we do remain what I would call unplugged, mostly at Cameroy, until the upper grades. That is because we're not against technology by any means, but it's about when. So we'd like the children to create their own original thought and develop those capacities before utilising technology, because it can be so misused. And in the later stages, then they can use the technology as a tool.
One of the videos that I've used a lot in my own teaching, and this whole course stems from my own teaching here at the Con, is a fantastic video by a paediatrician called Dimitri Christakis. And I can remember thinking when I watched that, if only someone would go and do some research into how how screen learning might be actually happening in music education. Of course, there's lots of stuff, DVDs and series like that, apps nowadays as well, for music education. Luckily enough, we happen to have someone here who was doing a PhD on it at the time, who's now finished it. So Wendy Brooks spoke in our MOOC.
One of the concerns that comes through, certainly what Dimitri Christakis was talking about was, the amount of time and what the kids are doing. I think more than even that, and the fact that, we shouldn't be there for 2 hours a day, I think it's more, what is it that they're doing? And are you just putting them in front of it every day while you have a shower and cook the dinner and do all those things to give yourself some free time? Or, is it something that we're sitting down with a family and having a laugh around and talk about? Or, and one of the things I would say no to is I found some interesting things when I looked into lullabies, and lullabies are a really traditional form of communication, I guess, between parents and children. So if you type a search of lullabies into YouTube, you come up with dozens and dozens of things, but lots of them will say something like, in bold letters, 4 hours of whatever, and it'll be, special effects, lights and I don't even know what you call them, but lots of special shiny bright colours and electronic sound effects playing Brahms' lullaby or something like that for 4 hours on a loop. So in terms of, is there something that we would not recommend? It would be that. So, do we plunge in with both feet? Do we hold back? Provocation 2. How important are the technology-rich musical cultures of our students? Now, I want you to understand I am not trying to reinvigorate the old popular music versus classical music in music education debate. That's ongoing and I'm sure will be forever. The point is that, of course, we should be pluralist and we should teach all musics in our music classrooms. But sometimes, some of us, if you're as ancient and old as I am, we think that we're teaching popular music and contemporary music when we might be teaching something like the Beatles or maybe as up-to-date as Nirvana, which I have been reassuredly told by a teenager is actually old people's music. So for information on this, I'd read a couple of chapters by an amazing adjunct professor from NYU, Ethan Hine, and I went to him to ask his thoughts on this. I found him incredibly provocative in his writing.
classical music and for whom that is like it connects to them personally and emotionally, and that is great. I would hate to take that away from anyone, but just as a statistical matter, the majority of kids don't connect to it emotionally. I mean, I personally think it's lovely, but it just doesn't grab me the way that like John Coltrane does, or the way that Run DMC does, or the Beatles, or Michael Jackson, or any of a million other things. And I'm glad to have learned about it, but if my only exposure was Handel and Mozart, I probably would not have ended up as a musician.
So we don't just spend time talking to academics and music teachers and learning futurists. I also wanted to get out into studios and actually talk to electronic musicians, people making their living with technology who hadn't been traditionally trained, who had perhaps learned informally. And probably the best example of that is Francis Xavier, who at this point tells a fantastic story of how he had started his music career with piano lessons in the local convent, and they ended like this.
The nun came to my house, knocked on the door and told my parents, look, I need to talk to you about your son. I feel that he's spending a lot of money on his musical career, and I feel that he doesn't have any musical talent, and you should get him to do something else.
And what about general classroom music? How was that for you in high school?
Because I already had an experience in electronic music, I thought the musical course in school would influence me a little bit more and actually put my ideas down on paper. But, it was still kind of boring theory before any practical.
And so we look at modern music curricula in private electronic music schools. And then, of course, it's very important to balance this stuff because there is, of course, the story of established traditional, as we've called it, music education, and who better to get to talk about that than Richard Gill, of course. And Richard does balance that argument absolutely beautifully. I was able to draw on the creative processes of people like Frank in his studio, but also of some of our own expert staff, such as Matthew Heinsohn, and to talk about the creative processes and where they might cross over. So I've just passed my 20 minutes and it's time for me to speak. The whole idea of this lecture series is that we keep it short and sharp and give ourselves something to talk about and make this two-way. The third provocation then is really not a provocation at all. It's a call for advocacy. There's a lot of buzzwords out there in 21st century education, and in fact 21st century education in many ways seems like its own little buzzword itself. I can't think of a better description. But there's no doubt that the ways that our children learn outside the classroom have definitely changed, and we can adopt them inside the classroom. I end with the argument in my own advocacy that in many ways what other people are looking for in education, when you hear about all of the different kinds of exciting things that they're doing in their classrooms, these different things are concerned, that we can't find better example in anything than music education. We already love learning hands-on. We're super good with technology. We've been building instruments for thousands of years. We are creators. When music education is done best, it really is, to me, best practice 21st century music education. And so I've had a great time making a MOOC about that. And I implore you all to go and work with statistics and be 21st century MOOC dropouts. Please sign up.
So thanks for coming out. I'm sorry I just made it in the tail end, but what I would like to do, you've met James and you know him if you're here probably. I'm Michael Webb, the chair of the Conservatorium Music Education Unit. I'd like to introduce you to my other colleagues as well. Associate Professor Kathy Marsh is, Kathy if you could, yeah she's waving. And I'm not sure if Associate Professor Jennifer Rowley is. Yeah, she is. Sorry, I can't see. Here's Jennifer. So the four of us aren't the only people that make up the music education unit. It's our esteemed casual lecturer staff as well as the students that channel through year after year. But I'd like to say thanks to James for kicking off the About Music Education series, which is a James Humberstone initiative, something that we're keen to support to bring educators together to, in a sense, interact with and air their own concerns and air aspects of our own experience and interest, and to see if we could get a new kind of a series going here that stimulates, further stimulates interest in our immediate vicinity and hopefully further beyond in best practice music education. So that's what we're about. What we'd like to do now is to open the floor. It'd be good to have some questions. You haven't taken any questions about any of the content so far, no. But maybe we should have some people to...
Or if you've got something that you're just itching to say, we really want this to be an open forum.
Thanks very much, James. I mean, it's clear what you're doing there is massively impressive. I'm just interested as somebody who is involved in music education, but obviously at tertiary level rather than secondary level. To what extent do you think that the technologies that you've been talking about ought to be introduced and inculcated in third level education? And can you see that, for example, there are structures with regard to the normative models of third level education that might impede such a development?
It's a really good question. So I mean, I sort of don't feel like there's a single answer for the whole of tertiary education. I think it really depends on how you're teaching, and also if we're going to stick just to music education, which we will today for the argument's sake. Certainly the old model of standing and giving a lecture and giving the same lecture every year is increasingly unnecessary, because if you're just standing there and saying something, we can video it. And there's been some really good research. In fact, because tertiary people have to produce research too, they're very good at writing about their own practices, and this idea of flipped learning, which is that you video your content so that if there's any lecture style material, people do it at home, and then you can make the stuff that happens in the class much more hands-on and allow students to create their own meaning by doing things. However, I think that can work in some places, and some lecturers in person are about as good as they are through a video, but not necessarily. Some people, really fill a space with their personality, and they've honed the art of lecturing. And I also don't think that there's anything wrong as children get older, and I'm not referring to tertiary kids as children, but as young. I don't think there's anything wrong with sitting and listening for an hour or two and taking on some complex information. I think the point is more, what's the best way to get something across? And sometimes we forget, because we came up through an institution ourselves, we assume that it's the best model. However I was taught, I mean, I sort of assumed that I'd taken exactly the right path to being a composer, because I went and got a bunch of degrees and learned to write music down and things like that. But nowadays there are 1,000 other ways to being a composer, and many of them are probably more profitable than the route that I took. But I think it's a question of, it's a matter of questioning your practice. If that lecture is really dry, oh, for heaven's sake, just video it and deliver it, via an LMS, and let people watch it as many times as they can till they've got all that information in their heads. But if there's a way that you can change something and make it so that people are much more involved in their learning, which is, I guess, the change from the lecture model to the seminar model to the tutorial model. In many ways, those boundaries are naturally becoming broadened in tertiary education at the moment. So I think the principle that we come to in the MOOC, which is let's be aware of what's happening at both ends of the scale in both research and practice, and then plot our own path through. Because in some place, I mean, the thing that's going on at Northern Beaches Christian School is absolutely amazing, that the kids, the teachers, Brad and Peter, never actually say shush or address the whole class at once. The kids just walk in and they open up their laptops and they know what to do. And they get on with making music. It's absolutely unbelievable. But I'm sure that many of us wouldn't be comfortable teaching like that, because that's not where we've come from, and we damn well like standing in front of the whiteboard and commanding attention. And so it's really a question of what's best for learning and being prepared to balance, I think. Sorry if I'm sitting on a fence.
Aren't these examples that you've given rather special but it was all about just listening. Now, I don't know how effective is that, just listening. Maybe it was because it was economics played a part.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that...
I think that's 5 questions, and I think they're all really, really important. I think you're getting at, a bunch of different things there. So if I can just take it from the start, if the difference in the schools that I've picked, and I have tried to pick best practice schools so that, I'm guilty as charged in a way, but if the difference is the inspiring, energetic teacher, then great. If that's unrealistic, from a certain point of view that we can all be inspiring, brilliant teachers, energetic teachers, well then great, there's a fantastic challenge to rise to. And all these wonderful undergraduates who are giving away an hour of their time right now to come to a lecture that they don't get any credit for, they're going to be the next generation of inspiring teachers. I think a really good criticism is the question of money, socioeconomic status. And it is easier to go into independent schools and to find, because there's a heap of money and they can pay teachers bigger salaries if they want to. However, we did make sure that we went out to low socioeconomic schools. So the school we went to in Melbourne with Musical Futures, 2 different schools, we've got clips from there, are schools that were actually set up in areas to kind of try and get around social problems in those areas. And the same as the school that I mentioned in Maryland here, the principal, Natalie said when she first took over at that school, that she would come back at every lunchtime and she would find this big long queue of kids in front of her office who'd all got in trouble for something over the morning or the lunch break. And, they had all these problems. Now, I said to her, because her response to this has been to make the entire curriculum project-based. They don't teach any subject on its own. Everything is integrated, and the teachers have done lots and lots of professional development and to become more energetic and inspired, and they've really put technology at the centre of how they deliver everything. And I said to her, this is great what you've done, it's very, very interesting, but, aren't you worried you've broken that sort of public school model of making sure you get your numeracy and literacy done in the morning so your NAPLAN results are good? And she said, I'm not worried, my NAPLAN results are rubbish, But in a couple of years, I don't have that queue outside my door anymore, and my attendance is up the same as all the other schools, in any area in Sydney. So my kids are engaged and they're motivated and they're learning. Now, her theory is the NAPLAN results will go up next, but really the problem there is what we're measuring it by. And I would say the same point to your question about learning through listening only. I mean, music is the most abstract of the arts. Learning to think about sound passing through time and all of the subtleties that go with our amazing art is incredibly complex. And so it certainly is not the starting point for learning music. The starting point for learning music is playing, singing, making up, and we can come to all of those amazing things by listening and studying as we go, and we can do it while we're doing all of those things. So I completely agree with you pedagogically. Yeah, unfortunately, with problems in education, lots and lots of different problems, it's easy to kind of standardise and to either push music out onto the edges or to keep the kids away from the instruments. Because if we give them the instruments, they might make too much noise, mightn't they? I told you it's really lots of questions together, but yeah. No. Jim.
James, thank you very much indeed. May I make an observation about what David Price said?
Yeah.
At least what I heard him say, which is that learning is now much more open than it used to be. And I just wonder how you respond to the suggestion that learning has been open for quite a few generations. People have been able to go to public libraries without money and cost and learn things. What's become open, particularly with the advent of social media and things like YouTube, is teaching. And that we are all able to learn from hundreds and hundreds of teachers who formerly, the people who put a recipe up on Facebook and that's fundamentally what's changed. And it's enabled us to engage with more teachers, more of whom are attractive to us as learners. And that's the actual real benefit of the advances in technology.
Yeah, really, really good point. And all of those people who are actually so passionate about the thing that they want to share and that they want to teach are probably those bubbly, energetic teachers again, aren't they? I think the world's actually full of them. We just need to get them in classrooms. I totally agree, Jim. It's a brilliant point. Or I could argue with you just to keep this going. I don't think David would argue with you either, by the way. He'd totally agree. I don't think he would think that his point is, you know, counter to yours.
No, not at all, not at all. But the thing that really counts, that has always really counted, is having teachers who are engaging, whether they've got technology, whether they aren't. These are important issues, certainly. Yeah. But we need to continue to produce and maintain excellent teachers for all of us.
Great, yeah. And we do touch on this in the MOOC. I didn't talk about it now, but actually the final section where we look at different creativities, so we look at Matthew's composition process and we look at Francis Xavier's process of creating and DJing electronic music and the similarities and the differences there. And there's some really, really interesting points. But what I'm trying to sort of push for there is that the idea of pluralism in music doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for everyone. It doesn't mean everything for everyone. It means you as the teacher can find the things that you can really lock onto and find things that are, you know, part of this idea of students' musical cultures and you know, things that really turn you on as well.
Yeah, but there is a danger with that. There is a danger of being perceived as, hey kids, I'm cool, when I'm not. I'm really, really not cool. And I'm perfectly prepared to listen and respond to the sorts of music that my students enjoy, but I'm never going to pretend that that's where I'm coming from, because kids can spot a phony a mile.
Yeah.
Just building on that last point there, and just taking a slightly devil's advocate position again, sort of stimulate some conversation. I mean, you've made a very good case for, you know, working with the technologies and the mediation strategies that the students are used to. Couldn't an alternative viewpoint be that they get that sort of strategy themselves, that it's our duty or our opportunity to present them with new materials that they wouldn't encounter themselves, new ways of engaging with said materials that they wouldn't encounter themselves? How would you respond to that?
I'd say yes. I'd say that there's a kind of a bit of a bandwagon out there, and Steve Collis in the little excerpt actually put it beautifully without being on the bandwagon. But it's that whole thing about, you know, the way kids learn outside school and how they learn inside school, and that mode of learning. So I think we can, as educators, we can make that part of our battery of ways of imparting information and engaging students without necessarily giving in to not also bringing new modes of learning, new ways, as you say. I mean, the thing that I kind of wonder on your point is more how many people are out there doing the hard work that it takes to be innovative with technology and to say, well, I've just thought of a completely new way that isn't Facebook and YouTube, but it's also not me standing and talking. And it is the middle ground and finding new things to do here that balance that all up, that's the really hard thing. Are there any students here who would prefer to have more online content or less online content? Yes?
I was thinking when Professor Lapham was speaking about courses that are compulsory through the music degree for everyone and how they could be made more accessible with technology that is appropriate. I feel that some of the technology that is used, and I think some of my peers would agree, is that some of the technology is outdated and so not actually easy to use. Whereas if things like the one that comes off the top of my head is AP, a lot of students struggle with that, and if there was a way of getting an interactive technology into that, I think that would boost a lot of confidence and make people feel like they have more control over it rather than going to an AP tutorial every week and thinking, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
And just getting into the exam room and hoping for the best.
Right. So are you thinking the opportunity to do more kind of drilling, or are you thinking to get more instruction, or?
I think a combination of the two would be great, to have more instruction accessible and doesn't take up tutors' time.
Yeah.
And that also to have different approaches, just like I can drill this in a different way and therefore feel like I've given everything I can to learning this, rather than that way doesn't work for me, so I'm a bit stuffed.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, I think because I go over to, we're not allowed to call it the main campus, the Camperdown campus, to do training in University of Sydney technologies from time to time. And quite often over there, they're seeking to use new technologies in ways that don't actually relate over here, because we have music education is such a unique model. Some of it is perhaps a little bit old-fashioned. We could talk about, one-to-one versus group teaching and all that kind of thing for hours, and that's another subject for another day. But in some ways I see that we're kind of actually ahead of the pack, and then in other ways I see, because some of those things don't apply so well to us, we're kind of miles behind the pack. But I actually think that if we all choose to keep ourselves up to date, and one of the things I say in the very final video is, if you've decided at the end of this, it's 40 minutes per module, which is, supposed to be done in a week. If you've decided by the end of this that you're never going to use a computer and you're going to carry on teaching Suzuki cello just the way you have already for 25 years, and you've got plenty of students to teach Suzuki cello to, then that's absolutely fine, because at least you've done the thinking and you've come out with that conclusion. And we're just trying to encourage critical thinking. At the same time, if you've decided that maybe you'll flip some learning and do some skills videos and deliver those to your students over social media, then that's really cool. And if you've decided to burn your cello and become a DJ, then I'm really sorry. But, it's the actual thinking process, isn't it, that's the really important thing. I think that's a good note to end on. We can continue this conversation out in the atrium. We've got some drinks and refreshments, thanks to Rebecca Lee, who is catered for us tonight as a gift to us, which is extremely kind of her. And we wanted to mention there is another one of these talks next week with two speakers, somebody who was a student last year and the person who was their mentor teacher. And they're going to talk about the relationship of the student and mentor teacher for those prackies. So very interesting for our students who are going out to do prackies next semester. Very interesting for current teachers who might want to think about how that relationship can be enhanced. You can have a look on our website. We have a Teach Meet later in the semester. I think there's one space left on the Teach Meet if you're a practicing teacher and you'd like to share some of your practice in a similar situation to this. And the Open Academy also asked me to mention that they're running an event called Jazz by Jazz Musicians. It's celebrating Gabe Bryant's new wonderful ebook resource, Jazz by Jazz Musicians. It's specifically a workshop for high school music teachers, Saturday 19th of March, which must be this Saturday, I guess. And the flyers look like that and they're around the place, so I've done that duty. My final thing is to thank our current Dean, Anna Reid, who has supported the start of this project and is allowing us to try and make the con a hub for music education here in Sydney and hopefully New South Wales, Australia, the world. And to David Kimboyle, who has videoed it for us so that we can get this stuff up on YouTube and share it with the world as well, which I think is really important. Thank you all for coming. Join us for a drink.